You're listening to the Veteran Etc. podcast, as there's always more to be said about a veteran. Join your host, Mike Kim, a veteran, ex-monk, seasoned war trauma therapist, and writer, as he shares his years of research in veteran readjustment culture and the meaning of warrior life. Now, here's your host, Mike Kim.
Veteran Etc. This is a show dedicated towards veteran culture and the culture of readjustment. Here we have today someone who I've heard a lot about, not just in the Columbia University circles, but also throughout different veterans, and now a big surprise in the area of May fighting, and then also being exposed to some of his other pursuits that are tied to academic versioning, writing, and research, etc. So here we have Stuart Doyle. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Mike?
Awesome. As I said earlier, it's great to have you on, and just wondering, just because, I hate speaking for other people, but if you could have viewers just have a glimpse into your life, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So I'll focus around the main reason why you would have me on this show, which has to do with being a veteran, having been in the military. So starting at the beginning, I decided I wanted to join the military when I was 9 years old. And I think it had to do with a couple of things. First of all, every boy plays war. He doesn't play accounting, or he doesn't play management consulting. So it was obvious what the interesting thing to do in life was. But also, at that point, I had learned about the sacrifices that were made from the Revolutionary War on through every war up until the present. And I knew way back then that it was not something I had earned to be an American yet. And I wanted to basically pay my way to be an American. And I told my mom when I was 9 years old that I wanted to join the military. And she was telling me about the various branches. And one of her brothers had been in the Marine Corps. So she told me, well, the Marine Corps is the most badass. They are the hardest, the toughest. They do the most dangerous things. So I was like, oh, okay. Well, obviously, I'm going to be a Marine then. And so a couple years later, I had a book from the library about the Marine Corps. I think I was 12 or 13 at the time.
Before we go into that, let me ask you this. Did you have any G.I. Joe dolls?
No, I don't think I did. No, can't say that I did.
Okay. That's really interesting that you said you described your mom's dialogue with you regarding the Marine Corps, because I had G.I. Joe dolls, and my mom would explain. My mom had a lot of like male energy. So it was interesting that my parents loved each other, but they fought a lot. But it's kind of some of the primal stuff that you were talking about earlier. But it's interesting. She would tell me stories through the G.I. Joe doll. So I can appreciate. I interrupt you because I can appreciate how your mom was telling you about her brother and also the narrative of the Marines. So I didn't want to interrupt, but yeah, I had to add that. Yeah.
No. Good addition.
Yeah.
But so when I was 12 or 13 or so, I was reading a book about the Marine Corps, and I got to this part where they explained what a Recon Marine is. And it's the first time I'd ever heard of that. And they basically explained that a Recon Marine is like a higher level of Marine. It's like the Marine who does the most dangerous jobs, who goes behind enemy lines to sneak around and gather information. And I thought that sounded like the coolest thing ever. So when I was 12 or 13, I don't remember which, I decided in that moment, reading that book, okay, then I'll be a Recon Marine. So I enlisted. I went to boot camp when I was 17, and then went straight from boot camp to infantry school, and then straight to the Basic Reconnaissance course, which is basically the haze fest that if you pass, you're a Recon Marine, and most people don't pass. But I got through that, and then I went to First Recon Battalion for my active enlistment. Let's see, if I did, while I was with First Recon, I did one deployment to Afghanistan. And I want to emphasize that I'm not as cool as, say, Rudy. I know you just did an interview with Rudy, who's also a Recon Marine.
I think you are as cool as, anyone. I mean, you know yourself that there's only one Rudy Reyes, right?
Yeah.
So that's all I have to say, right? Like
Right.
like.
But I mean, I want to emphasize that I consider myself a below average Recon Marine, not like Rudy. But anyway, so at First Recon, I did one deployment to Afghanistan.
This is why I disagree, because one, they were even willing to take you back. And I think that, a lot of people don't know this, but you also, I think you're still in, or you return to the reconnaissance community, like in the reserves. And the only reason why I know a little bit about this is because when I was in Anglico, and, Anglico is great. And I'm not one to say, oh, I wanted to do this or do that. No, I was happy with Anglico and all that. But I just remember that back in the 80s, a lot of Anglico guys who couldn't stay in recon or chose to switch recon for some reason, not bad reason, but they go into Anglico, and then some Anglico guys would go into recon. As a matter of fact, that one Recon Marine, Kinney, he's one of the first African-American Recon Marines from like our generation. He's down in Miami, but he was like, looking at Anglico and recon and all that. But the bottom line is this: I knew that in Anglico, like on the reserve side, if you were Anglico or recon, it was actually even harder to get into the reserve units if you had a recon background or in an Anglico background, because they've got your whole record book in front and can kind of like see. So that I knew guys that were not accepted back into the reserves in Anglico. So just to kind of like let the people know, I have your narrative, but I also provide addition to that narrative just from my background.
Yeah, and that might have something to do with a lot of big Marine Corps units hating the units who they don't want to admit might be doing something a little bit more difficult or slightly more sophisticated.
And so let me ask you this. I know you were in recon with an active duty unit, but then you chose to go back in the reserves, and instead of like maybe going easily into a reserve unit and making gunny 1, 2, 3 in some leg unit or something like that, you chose to actually put your service record book up to the challenge and pursue a reserve recon unit and still maintain standards and all that, even when you're in civilian world of Whataburgers and my favorite drink, Coca-Cola Zero, but I mix it with regular Coca-Cola.
Sponsor
Coke Zero, but then I mix it with regular Coke. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I mean I do the same thing. I did. Wow, I thought I came up with that. I mean, I guess I did, but so did you.
So tell me about the whole readjustment regarding that before we talk about the other parts of your life and also concepts of readjustment.
That was a very circuitous path, because so I did one deployment, and we got back from that, and it was looking like the wars were dwindling down. There wasn't going to be another just similar deployment coming up. So I figured that would be a good time to get out, go to college. So I totally left the military. I didn't go into the reserve straight from active. I did my whole undergraduate degree at Columbia, where I met you. I didn't hang out with you a lot when we were there.
Right.
But, we have a lot.
I had a kid, and then not that you were part of this, but there was also like a toxic part of the whole Columbia. It's just, I mean, it happens on a lot of college campuses, but I just think because Columbia is like the biggest out of all the campuses, with the, vet student community, there are periods at times of transition and everything, and there's toxic elements there. But I always appreciated hearing about you through a close friend that I think we both have, as in George. And,
Yeah.
I love it because, it's only like at Columbia where a hippie like me, can be like very close friends to George,
Yeah.
and we both can talk a common language in poetry and in other things and stuff like that. So I've just heard many great stories about you, so yeah.
I'll have to go thank George for saying only the nice things then, because but anyways, yeah, I did like almost 4 years at Columbia, finished there, and then I went straight into a master's program at UPenn, University of Pennsylvania.
Nice.
And then I wasn't really finding what I was looking for in the civilian world. I was bouncing around a little bit. I did a little bit of executive protection work in Hollywood,
Mhm.
but even that was, I even found that boring. But
Even when people would call you the buffed Ronan Farrell, it is.
yeah, no, especially that. I had to get away from that.
Did people ever confuse you for it's like, dude, Ronan, have you been working out?
No, I mean, people would get stuck on the hair and they'd call me a big Conan O'Brien.
Wow. So you did that, all of that at like actually that elite level of security. So many questions, so many questions. Just briefly, in regards to that, like that bored you?
Yeah, I would boil that down to playing defense versus playing offense.
Mm,
Protection work is a lot of preparation and a lot of staying alert for something that rarely happens. It's just, I mean, the company I worked for was great. They're a very,
yeah.
very good company. And the clients I worked for with them were good people. It's just,
The offense defense part that you
yeah,
had talked
exactly.
about.
Offense
Right.
versus defense. Yeah, I'm not a fan of purely playing defense. I want
Right.
it, I'd rather go hunting, if you know what I mean.
Right. And so is that why in many ways, and we're only saying this on a more metaphorical level, but does that also kind of inspire you to just kind of like pursue these new or revisited interests, like academics, MMA, and then going back into the reserves, because these are multi-level, intense, pressure cooker hunting, like metaphorically speaking, alpha type, not to be generalized or to generalize, but these type of, pursuits, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, so I was doing that for a little while, and then I have a good friend who I mean, he's been, let's see, I met him when we randomly got assigned as roommates back in 2010 at First Recon Battalion. And he was in the reserves at a recon unit, and he was like, "Hey, we're doing a little deployment to Asia, not a combat deployment, but, taking a little trip to Asia, bouncing around a few countries." And I thought that sounds fun. So I decided to join the reserves to go on that trip, and I had been completely out of the military for like 6 years at that point.
Mm.
And so I went to the recruiter, and of course, it was a whole big paperwork mess, having totally been out for 6 years. Like they wouldn't take me at MEPS. Like they refused to process me at MEPS. For those who don't know, the Military Enlistment Processing Center or something like
Yes.
that, where they go through this physical exam for all the new recruits, and they fill out a specific DoD medical form and mark you as qualified or unqualified. They would not take me at MEPS, so I had to go to a civilian doctor with a DoD form and be like, please do a physical and fill out this specific form. And we got to the part where it was like, there was some kind of like foot arch classification, and it
I
was
know it
like
well.
they're classified as like A, B, C, D, or whatever. And the doctor was like, we don't use this classification. I don't know what this is. And then I was like, okay, just let me Google it real quick. And I was like, okay, so like write A, because A means normal or something like that. And I was like, okay. So that's how I got back into the military in the reserves. So I did one deployment with them, and then got back from that. And that unit actually ended up disbanding, and I went to another unit down in Alabama now.
Mhm. And the mobile, yeah, that's been around for a while. Is that a Force Recon?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Third
yeah,
Force Recon Company.
yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. And so how do you do this? Because we'd have guys in Anglico fly when I was at fourth, fly from like Texas, California. Are you like one of those kind of guys? Like you don't like
Yeah.
you don't live in Alabama, but for the passion of the unit or for the camaraderie or for both, you actually fly from where Missouri. Are you presently living there?
Yep. Yeah, I'm in Missouri right now, and I'll fly, or once in a while I'll drive with actually that same friend who got me into the reserves.
Mhm. Mhm.
He lives nearby. Sometimes we'll drive down together, and they'll reimburse us for the flight or for the mileage.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's not bad. It takes a while to get there, and the airport in Mobile is probably worse than any third world airport I've ever seen. Mobile,
Yeah,
I'm not
inside.
going to go down a rant about a
Yeah,
city in Alabama, but it's
yeah. I get it. Let me ask you this. And so, with the just so people know, because I think also David Goggins had this experience. I think he actually joined, I think when he first joined the SEALs, I think he was in a reserve SEAL unit and then switched, or I'm not sure. But just for you to, and I was in Reserve Anglico, and just to let you, just to find out from you, what do you find, like what's the culture like, just so that people know, because Air Force has its reserve special units, Marine Corps does, Army does, and just to so that people kind of like learn a little bit about the different cultures and stuff. Can you say?
yeah, sure. So with regards to the culture of, well, Third Force and basically any recon unit it's very different from the big Marine Corps culture. And there are good parts of the big Marine Corps culture for sure. Like, I'm not anti-Marine Corps, I'm in the Marine
Right.
Corps. But the negative aspects of the big Marine Corps culture are, I could say, they're a little bit robotic. They're a little bit do things but don't know the reason, or do things that have no reason. So we kind of do things differently at my current unit. We're a little bit more chill, but we're chill while doing things that would make a lot of Marines break down and cry. So we kind of get to be chill because we do hard things. And once you prove yourself, I would say you get treated like a human, but you do have to prove yourself. Is that
Yeah.
kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah, yeah. I think that lets a lot of viewers into some of the cultural things I wanted to kind of pick out. So yeah, that's really interesting. And so here you have, even before you rejoin the military, you already have like this kind of like, experience with doing hard things and kind of maybe being your own self-thinker in an elite part of the military. How does that translate, or how did that translate into your academic life, like at Columbia, and like maybe your interests now?
Well, I mean, it was kind of funny because I saw a lot of parallels between the students at Columbia and the Recon Marines I worked with. Well, in that there was a certain drive towards excellence, totally different domains of excellence, but it was very familiar to be around a lot of people who were competing all the time and working towards something and intense about the way they live. Of course, there are a lot of extreme differences too. Like, oh, it just felt gross when I was first there, like how soft everybody was, just how weak everybody was. But, I mean, I was the weird one, not them.
Yeah, well, they were weird in their own way. So yeah, no, I get it. So New York crazy weather, so crazy that I go to Hawaii in the winter nowadays, since I'm an old retired
Very
young looking
nice.
guy. Yeah.
Very
But
nice.
how, like with you, like when you're at Columbia, or even now, like the cold weather and stuff like that, with like the semester going on, if you wanted to, you could smoke and joke in the cafeteria, college cafeteria for hours and study and whatever, hibernate. How did you keep like in shape and like everything. And then also that road back to rejoin the military, being out for 6 years, like physically, I mean, you know, that's a question, I have, because that is part of like some of the readjustment.
Yeah, definitely is part of readjustment, because that's one thing I suppose is fortunate, is one thing that I use to keep my mental and emotional levels, just in equilibrium, is exercise. So
Mhm.
when I was in college, I was constantly like lifting weights in the gym, like I would be like studying all night, and then maybe my girlfriend would be like, "Oh, let's relax, let's watch a movie or something." Like, I can't, I gotta go lift for a couple hours, And so I've always done that, and I think that's something that's really helped me maintain like a decent mental state over the years. And then on top of that, I was actually Columbia had a Taekwondo club team, and we would compete in the Eastern Collegiate Taekwondo Conference.
Mhm.
And so I was doing a little bit. I mean, it wasn't my priority, so I wasn't super good at it, but I was going and competing, in a lot of tournaments back then. So that was a good way to stay in shape, and it translated well to the MMA I do now. I mean, I got my black belt in Taekwondo when I was 16, so
Mm.
I was really into it when I was intensely into it as a kid.
Where did you grow up? Where did you learn Taekwondo?
Well, I lived in Wisconsin at the
Okay.
time,
Mhm.
and there was this good older guy at our church who, well, so my parents could never afford like martial arts classes before this, but this guy at our church, he started up like a church taekwondo class for
Mhm.
free, and he did it for like 6 years straight, and I
Okay.
was in it,
Mhm.
just doing it and practicing at home and going to class like every class, practicing it every day at home, because I was a little obsessed with it when I was a kid, and
Mhm.
got my black belt through him.
Mhm.
And yeah, it was a big part of my childhood, but I didn't get to practice a lot of that specifically while I was active duty in the military, because it's much more important to work on shooting or ruck running or swimming,
Yeah.
finning, whatever. So martial arts is actually a much smaller part of most combat troops than people expect.
Yep.
But so once I got out of the military and went to college, I saw these people wearing the pajamas, throwing kicks from across the gym, and I was like, oh, that looks familiar. I wonder what these people are doing. So I went and talked to them, and I joined, and so I did that while I was in college. So that was a good time too.
Think that no, and I'm not making comparisons, but it's interesting. Joe Rogan started off in Taekwondo, and I think he did really well and
Yeah.
competitively, and then he got into MMA and all that and BJJ. What do you think the Taekwondo did for you as far as for MMA?
Well, I mean, I have much better kicks than anyone I'm competing against. Like, I'm
And
not a
you sense
professional.
it, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I'm not a professional yet, so I'm not at a high level. I've not yet achieved much in MMA. I'm 3-0.
Still something.
I'm an amateur. I'm working towards becoming a pro. I'm looking for a fight right now. I was injured for a few months, but I'm good.
Mhm.
I'm looking for a fight. So,
Nice.
hopefully I'll be fighting next month or the month after, something like that.
Where are you usually going for? Like for the three fights, have they been local or have they been in different parts of the country?
They've been in the Midwest. I've had 2 fights in Kansas City, and then I drove to Iowa for
Mhm.
another fight.
Okay. All right. Well, everyone has to have a beginning somewhere. And so, I mean, that's how the Mayweathers and Conor McGregors, and I mean, you have to start somewhere. I
Yeah,
just
I
think
mean,
it's,
everybody starts as an amateur, so.
yep. And so far, what do you notice and what can you share about the culture of MMA with folks? Like what are some things that you notice? Because that's a whole new life world, right? You're an Ivy League educated, Recon Marine, who's looking at academic future, or can go many different paths, but then you go into this type of culture.
Yeah, but I would say it's pretty similar to, say, like a recon culture, because again, it's a bunch of people who are very driven towards what they're doing. They're working extremely hard. Not only that, so it's very, very different, but both cultures are basically in the hurting business. They're in the danger business.
Mhm.
And there's just like a certain mindset that translates well between the two. And the MMA people might not realize that their mindset would apply to real war, but I do think they would be pretty good at it. And so I see a lot of similarities. I think there's a certain deep drive to fight. Like I think some people are born to fight or made to fight. And at some point, somewhere deep inside most humans, there's a drive to fight, but most never. In today's society, where we're safer than we've ever been in reality, even despite the news headlines, most people just never need to fight, and they're too afraid to seek out a fight. But you can tell that it's intrinsically enthralling to most people based on what do most young males in the world spend hours doing every night? It's playing some sort of video game that in some way has to do with fighting, whether it be like first person shooter or like fantasy war, or like a Street Fighter type fighting game or something like that.
Yeah.
Not only that, but every blockbuster movie is primarily about some sort of fight. So
Mhm.
there's this human drive, and I would say in the MMA people and in certain military circles, or the military in general even, that drive to fight, that deep instinct to fight, is just a little elevated. So I kind of, I feel at home there either way.
Right, right. And yeah, that's what, like, I mean, as a psychoanalyst, you and I may be in different camps to a certain extent, but at the same time, might be in similar camps, because I know as a Freudian, I only say this because I'm a psychoanalyst and there's just very few people these days who really are into psychoanalysis. But I think that where there's like intersections, and again, I'm just only making assumptions. I'm not saying this because of anything that you may have written or not. I'm just making assumptions. But like, yeah, even Freud was talking about this instinctual, kind of like drive in many ways for conflict, right? And this whole thing with conflict, it's that it's natural within us, but then we can find ways to manage that, right? And in many ways, in psychoanalysis, you identify your resistances, and then with that, it's helpful to manage them. What are your thoughts on that? And also, it's interesting you talk about the MMA. And while at first MMA got real negative, whatever, a lot of negative publicity, I think a lot of people have been able to come around to kind of like look at it as not just like a meat grinding, ring activity, but something much, much more than that, involving, sport, as well as, maybe like skateboarding across some mountain, maybe an extreme level of sport.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Freud. I'm not a Freudian, as you rightly guessed, but I did come across something he wrote recently for something I was working on, and it's probably what you were referring to. Let's see. He's like, let's see. So originally Freud held this position where he didn't really believe in a natural drive towards violence. He mainly conceptualized violent action as like resulting from some sort of
Yeah.
sexual, well, fundamentally sexual drive that got distorted by like events in childhood. But there's this thing he wrote later in life that I found, where he says, like, eventually he came to the conclusion that because of the ubiquity of non-erotic aggressivity and destructiveness, he adopted the standpoint, therefore, that the inclination to aggression is an original, self-subsisting, instinctual disposition of man. So it's probably,
Yeah,
I found that funny that I just recently read that, even though I'm
it's
not a
awesome.
Freudian at all, but yes.
Well, I think what happens is, there are, crossings and intersections. And yeah, so it's cool to have this dialogue and for viewers to kind of like get, this exchange.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so when it comes to, so we engage that, and we could do another show to go back on some of these points. But as for now, I'm very interested because you also wrote an article, and you're not, I mean, you're at a master's level, and yeah, you went to another Ivy League school, you went to Penn for your master's degree. So it is, it's acceptable for people in master's programs to write articles, but it's very rare. And so, I give you a lot of credit, for you to be able to do that. And then not only that, you did it in one of my topics in the area of like war trauma and PTSD. And I was just wondering that one article that you wrote, and I just want to know more about like your perspective and kind of like your exploration of the literature. But that article that you wrote regarding PTSD and or war trauma and post service readjustment and just some of your kind of like views on that, it'd be interesting to see and hear because you go up against, in a pros and cons kind of way, a major figure in the field of trauma, and that's Charles Figley.
Actually, let me grab the book real quick for a funny story about that.
Okay, sounds good. As he does that, I will speak and just say that Charles Figley
So
is one of the first traumatologists, and he was helpful in the creation, along with Robert J. Lifton, someone who I've met, and Smith, and the other people who were tied to the Vet Center movement and the early rap groups out of VA Manhattan, 23rd Street. But yeah, Stu, you've got the book, and let's chat about it.
So first I want to tell another little funny
Yeah, go
anecdote,
for it.
veteran related. But so it
Yeah.
started off, I had this totally unrelated idea. I was thinking for a long time about free will, human free will. There's obvious reasons why some people start to think that it's not real. People start to think, oh, physical determinism, you don't control what happens to the little molecules in your brain, et cetera, blah, blah. So free will is not real. And I was trying to figure out for years why that was wrong. And then I finally figured it out. So I wrote it in the form of a philosophy article, and I submitted it to this journal, the Journal of Mind and Behavior. And that when you submit one of these articles to be reviewed and potentially published, you submit it anonymously.
Yes.
So it can be fairly reviewed by some academic somewhere who you don't know who that is either. So they call it double blind review. So, you don't say who you are. So I just submitted it, and then they accepted it. They said it was great and they were going to publish it. And they asked me for my institutional affiliation to print with the article, which, for those who don't know, that basically typically means like what university do you teach at? Like, where are you a professor? But I'm not affiliated with any. Well, I'm affiliated with one institution, which I put on there.
What is it? My eyes are bad.
It says Third Force Reconnaissance Company,
Oh,
USMC.
okay, all right, yeah, yeah.
So I
Wow.
put that in this
Yeah, academic
philosophy
journal.
and psychology journal.
Yeah.
But anyway, since I had to put that in there, or I didn't have to, but I chose to put that in there, they knew I was in the military.
Yeah.
And so when they got this book sent to them by the publisher, which is the one you were referring to, called Psychiatric Casualties by Mark Russell and Charles Figley, they were looking for somebody to write either a review or a critical notice on it, meaning like a more, a review where you can actually make a comment more so than just a summary. And so I said, sure, yeah, I can do that. So they sent it to me, and I I read through it, and most of it is really good information. It's they really make the case that the military has repetitively, like over time, over and over and over again, failed to properly prepare to treat the psychiatric casualties from each consecutive war.
Yes.
And on top of that, sometimes they've like mistreated them, like, explicitly. It was just like one crazy example is that they had some psychiatric casualties being shipped back from the Pacific in World War II, and they put them in cages, and there was like 19 of them died on the trip home in these cages on the ship. It was crazy. I didn't know about that. But so there's just like all sorts of examples and historical facts in this book. And they end with recommendations about how the system could be improved, actually. So it's really good. They point out a problem, they present certain solutions. But there was one point in the book that I was reading through it, and it didn't really seem right. They mentioned that, well, they were trying to make the case that there's no such thing as predisposition to PTSD. And one of the data points they used in support of that was the fact that another thing most people don't know, in World War II, the Selective Service actually had the most extensive like psychological screening process in any war. Yeah, so they had actually rejected like 1.6 million potential recruits just based on the neuropsychiatric screening, because they was trying to screen out the people who were predisposed to mental breakdown in combat, which they did realize, too little too late was a problem in World War I. So they were trying to alleviate that by screening these people out.
Yep.
But, of course, a lot of service members still ended up having a lot of psychiatric problems from the war. And on top of that, they cited the fact that once the US got later in the war and they needed more manpower, they ended up relaxing the screening standards and accepting people who had previously been rejected by the screening. And it was found that most of these people who were previously rejected and were subsequently enlisted did end up doing okay and not being psychiatrically discharged. And they cite that as support for their claim that there's no such thing as predisposition to PTSD. But when I read that, I realized that was the completely wrong conclusion to draw, because they didn't use the right comparison groups. Like they should have compared the baseline rate of psychiatric discharges from the people who passed the initial screening and compare that to the discharge rate of those who initially failed and were later enlisted, because that's actually a really great natural experiment. Because usually in psychology and social sciences, you don't get to manipulate one variable in the real world and see like how these two groups are different. You either have a contrived laboratory experiment, where the stakes are low and the conditions are not applicable to the real world, or you have real world correlational data, which usually cannot supply you with a causation. It's just a correlation. But in a natural experiment like this, where you have two groups, basically one group initially rejected, one group initially accepted, and then both of them went to war, and then you can compare the rates of psychiatric discharge. And the rate differed by like 500%. So that implies that the initial psychiatric screening was effective in screening out people who would be psychiatrically discharged later on. And on top of that, it means that, so there is such a thing as predisposition, and it's screenable even with techniques available in 1941, which is a totally different conclusion than the authors of the book came to. So I put that in my article about it. And I have not actually been in any contact with the authors of the book, but yeah, that's the main point I made about it.
That's an interesting point, and I think you should reach out to them. I think they would be willing to engage in this. I know that with war veterans who went to Vietnam, it's really interesting because I've done like over 1,000 hours, and this kind of speaks with what the original literature that you're talking about, and also your findings. And I would just add to all of that and say that, yeah, out of like my qualitative, like over, I'd say 5 to 10,000 hours of doing psychiatric assessments. I mean, when I talk about psychiatric, not that I am a psychiatrist, but I was tied to
Is in
the VA.
psychoanalytic.
Yeah, yeah, and within a medical model as a clinician at the VA through the Vet Center program. So let me correct that, more the mental health. So not psychiatric, but mental health using psychiatric, the diagnostic book, DSM-5 now. And so you're kind of familiar with all this because of your review of the book and your article that yeah, is very intriguing. I found a lot of veterans from Vietnam War having a lot of a lot of trauma, good number with PTSD. It's really interesting. Many of them had fathers who served in World War II, and most of those homes were some level of domestic violence, child abuse, child sexual abuse, just a lot of pathological behavior. Not saying that the let me correct that, not pathological behavior, but I would say hidden pathological realities within home life. I'm not saying all of them, but there was a high percentage of them. And so it's really interesting as far as long term. And this does not disprove or is not in, how can I say it, not in competition with your claim that talks about the discharges, right? Because that's very specific. And it's also very telling because you're also looking at issues regarding fitness as far as retention, which is very important to look at in the military, as well as the continuation of service, whether in garrison or in war. So I think your contribution is positive. What can you say about anything that you've done or that you've kind of researched in regards to like veteran readjustment, which is a little bit different?
Yeah, well, in terms of readjustment, I would say I have one perspective that may be slightly different from what you can hear anywhere else, which is that not all of the problems that veterans have readjusting are due to what the military or what happens to them in the military. A lot of it is a selection. It's a selection bias. It's there's a certain type or types of people who want to join the military and also seek out certain roles within the military. And those are the same people who also end up getting, exposed to a lot of traumas in the military. And then they get out and there's this sort of interaction between problems they may have from experiences in the military on top of their particular type of personality that brought them to the military in the first place. So I'm kind of speaking from experience in that, like I said, I knew what I wanted to do when I was 9 years old, and then I did it. And so I've kind of always been the way I am. And the way I am is still what drives me to fight people in a cage in MMA. And I
Within a
think
competitive in this competitive spirit, of
yeah,
assertiveness and all that.
right.
Or this inner
But
will. Yeah.
yeah, but it goes beyond assertiveness or competitiveness, because you can be assertive and competitive in a game of tennis or
Sure.
in a, I don't know, in a
Or something.
in a startup sales pitch. I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
But you know, it's this like physical restlessness that
Yeah.
I think a lot of veterans experience, and it gets confused with a symptom of PTSD because that can also happen.
Hmm.
But the thing with well, I have a whole theory about this. I don't know how long you want me to drone on about it, but
Well, how about this? Add in, and maybe in the future we can talk about this on another episode. We could just totally just talk about, this. I know you started in regards to military mental health, which is different from veteran mental health. And I think it's very important to hear everything that you said regarding the psychiatric issues and all of these issues tied to military, and then immediate transition, the long-term transition. Yeah, you've given some interesting words, and I definitely want to hear, like, at least right now, like a summary of, or just kind of like some statements about this issue of readjustment is real. You recognize it. What do you think is maybe the cause of it all, or do you think there's just several different causes, or just or
well,
certain
yeah, sure.
comparisons?
So
Yeah.
I think there's definitely several causes. One being the obvious one that Charles Russell or that Mark Russell and Charles Figley write about,
Mhm.
being, you know, what they call stress injury,
Mhm.
commonly known as post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as post-traumatic stress, because some people don't want to call it a disorder, which makes sense too. But there's another thing I want to bring into people's consciousness, which is not an injury from being involved in traumatic situations, but a natural drive towards violence that brings a lot of people to the military, in my view.
Mhm.
And then they get out of the military and they are law-abiding citizens, as they should be, and they feel restless and they feel like they don't belong in contemporary society, because in my opinion they really don't. I mean, I don't, but they don't realize that it's because they should be fighting. They
Mhm.
were made to fight and they should be fighting, but there are ways to do it that are not antisocial, they're not destructive,
Right.
ways to channel that are healthy and acceptable, and they make your mindset clearer, more peaceful, just more joyful, and for during the rest of your life when you're not fighting. So MMA would be one example of that. Like, personally speaking, it's been the best thing for my mental state maybe ever. And then I would say hunting is another one of those, like deer hunting. You
Mhm.
know, it's a good way to get the most natural, like, hormone-free meat you can. I mean, you don't have to compete in MMA. You could just roll in jujitsu, or join a boxing club, something like that.
So things that, in many ways, I'm hearing you this, and I'm not trying to go one side or another, but it's just observation as far as, like, I don't know, like the samurai, or, Haringdo soldiers and stuff in Korea, and some of, the monastic traditions in Asia. They have integrated this primal sense of violence, as we can call it, or anger, self-anger. As a psychoanalyst, I would say, some type of projected or internalized anger, but they've integrated a lot of that. It just seems as though we're kind of, and I don't want to create some type of mysticism towards this. I'm just kind of like giving you an ethnography in many ways, as far as, like, being in these different settings. I was a monk too, for 10 years in the Western tradition, but I spent time with folks from the East. And it's interesting you mention all this, because even in my order, the Dominican order, I have a very kind of like interesting take on the Crusades. I don't, I don't have the popular notion of the Crusade, but I will say this, that the different warrior codes that were set up for the knights, and even the cross, the Lombard cross, the red cross on the armor, that's all tied to like the Dominican order. And then Dominicans have also a tie to the Knights Templars and all of that. And so I guess I'm going to shut up, but what I'm saying is not mirroring, but just kind of like throwing something up that has like some type of interesting connection, of what you're saying in regards to some type of integration that you're talking about.
Yeah, I completely agree with the picture you're painting by mentioning all these different historical societies that managed to incorporate their martial arts, martial values, their
Mhm,
martial training
mhm.
with their religious or philosophical, or just say chivalrous values.
hmm Do you think that at times, and we've gotten into this deeply, and if viewers can't see where we're going, let me just say we're going in the point of like saying or looking at how how is this understood or misunderstood from the dominant culture and maybe from the clinical world in many ways? Is there something there here? What I
Oh
point
yeah,
out?
yeah, it's definitely misunderstood. For example, I did a master's degree in criminology,
Okay.
and so I'm pretty familiar with the psychology literature on violence and the causes of violence. And there's usually this implicit or explicit assumption where violence is abnormal and nonviolence is normal. So a normal person is, or a normal person is someone who does not have some sort of classified behavioral disorder. And then someone who does have a classified behavioral disorder, so that would be a way to explain their violence. So normal is nonviolent, you know, and then abnormal is violent. But I think they got it backwards, because I think most humans, and especially some humans, the normal state is to have a certain drive towards violence, because you can't survive or gain status or reproduce in the past without without being violent towards animals that you're hunting, like any other predator. Like a mountain lion is inherently violent because it has a drive to kill. Humans are predators as well, and then humans for all of history have fought each other in groups, have fought each other individually, have fought each other in like national level groups. So what I'm trying to say is that normal is actually to be a little violent. And these days, most people only explore that through watching movies and playing video games, which are almost all centered around some sort of battle or some sort of conflict or something of the sort. And so clinically, if someone is feeling restless or having like a elevated heart rate when they shouldn't, or just feeling stressed in general, the first thing the clinician will probably think of is this is anxiety related. This person is showing all the physiological symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder. But I think for some of those people, they're actually experiencing the physiological symptoms of the opposite of anxiety. Because if you understand anxiety in an ethological perspective, anxiety is what prepares your body and your mind to protect yourself from an unspecified danger that may be lurking behind you. You don't know. But the opposite of anxiety would be you are the unspecified danger lurking in the dark, and your body and your mind are prepared to be dangerous. But the physiological state is very similar, because an animal that's defending itself from danger and an animal that is being danger are basically both engaged in intense physical exertion. They're engaged in very similar physical activities with opposite purposes. And so as humans, I would say that some people they're overly activated in their anxiety circuits, and others are overly activated in the opposite of anxiety, but they present similarly physiologically. But there's no word for the opposite of anxiety in the psychological literature or in clinical practice. It's kind of just something I've made up, but I'm working on a theory about it that I'm trying to publish and get out there.
Yeah. All right. Well, I encourage all of that. And I was just wondering, what are some things that you'd like to say? But before we go there, I didn't complete my inquiry about the time when you were doing, high end, billionaire and Hollywood security, as far as the boredom, I interrupted you. It wasn't the company, it wasn't the clients, it was the defensive part that we spoke about. And then you got involved with MMA, you got involved with academics and everything. And what are just some other things that are you into, and some things that you're going to be pursuing before some of your last words?
Well, I mean, that's about all I'm into is
It's a lot.
military stuff,
Yeah.
martial arts, philosophical and psychological theories. I mean, I'm into investing for sure, but
Okay.
don't really want to cover that here.
Okay. But that's okay. Yeah, you're caught up with that as well. And then also, where do you see yourself in like 5 to 10 years?
5 to 10 years, I'll probably be at some university working on a PhD. I'm trying to become a pro fighter, but I'm almost 32 right now, so my career will have to be a short one. And after that, I'll move on to either a PhD in philosophy or in psychology,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
some unspecified university somewhere.
That's fine. I think you're gonna be contributing to the field, and what's great is to always know a veteran who's contributing to the field, because there's something to integrate the numbers as well as the experience. I just kind of like seeing the two. When I say numbers, I mean like the statistical data, and so you're capable of doing that, but also you're also able to kind of engage the qualitative. So I can appreciate that as well. So yeah, it's been great having you. Any last words? And if folks want to contact you or know about your fights or articles, like what's kind of like, some good places they could find you?
Let's see. For last words, I just want to thank you, Mike, for all you do for the veteran community, and
Thank you.
all you've done with working on your veteran narrative structure and all the interviews you do. It's great. And then if people want to contact me, I'm on Twitter. I don't quite remember what my Twitter. Oh, it's Stuart T. Doyle. So Stuart is capitalized, T is capitalized, and then Doyle
Okay.
capitalized.
Mm-hmm. And they
Like a
can
name
find
would
out.
be. It's capitalized like a name would be. I don't even know if you have to capitalize on Twitter. I don't know.
Okay. And then also, like, if they want to know about fights, is it through Twitter? Is that your primary channel, or do you
Yeah, like
have other things?
yeah, when I have a fight coming up, I'll I'll post up I'll post it up, and usually there's like a streaming link for fights that I'll post as well. So yeah, if I have a fight coming up, I'll post it on my Twitter, and people can watch it on the stream if they want, you know.
And also they could find out things like updates like on Insta or on Facebook or
Yeah, I do have an
else.
Instagram. I have an Instagram and a Facebook. I don't remember my Instagram handle because
But
I'm
it's
not.
Stuart, but your complete
It's yeah,
name, how they could find you is through Stuart Doyle, right?
yeah, Stuart Doyle.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
and
With a U.
there's StuartDoyle, and there's a couple of videos of my fights on YouTube too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
If you
did
want to search
see.
that. So.
I see. I saw your primal kind of to validate some of your concepts and stuff. So yeah, check out the videos there. I don't know. What I noticed was that you did bring that warrior. I don't know if I'm gonna say aura, but kind of like the things that you're talking about. And that's why I wanted to have you on here, because it's not like glorification of violence or anything like that, or to create any type of mass media kind of like, I don't know, positive masculinity or toxic masculinity. It goes beyond that. We're having a discussion about people in their life worlds. And we found you, Stuart. We found Rudy. We found people like me who is into these days thumb wrestling, even though I was my school's lineal wrestling. I don't want to say it, varsity men, but these days I thumb wrestle, with my hippie beads, and yet I can still be in great dialogue with you and others, and to learn more about this thing that we have within us, because we didn't just end up in uniforms, right? There's always some before the military, during the military, and after the military. I think you've done a great job in helping enhance my research concept of veteran readjustment culture. So thank you so much, and please just keep us informed of everything, and yeah, you're a value to the community.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Thank you very much. It's been a ride and a great intellectual inquiry into the different things that Stuart Doyle has offered us tonight at Veteran, etc. It's a podcast that always has something to say about a veteran, and always allows a veteran to say something about the larger community. And it's greatly appreciated.
Veteran Etc. invites you to join us again with your host, Mike Kim, every Sunday. If the content from this podcast is informative to you, please share the podcast with others. Give a like and or post something you learned from the episode on social media. If interested in other truly informative podcasts like Veteran Etc., check out cominghomewell.com for a listing of other veteran-based podcasts. Thank you for tuning in.